Destiny 2 has always been somewhat of a curious game to me. There's a lot I like about it, and there's a lot I don't like. It's really the definition of a mixed bag for me, all in all. I am by no means a hardcore Destiny fanatic. I've never once participated in a raid, and instead opt out in favor of the more mainstream daily and weekly quests, as well as playing through the DLC related quests. Prior to the game re-releasing on Steam, back when it was exclusively on Blizzard's Battle.net launcher, I easily put in a few hundred hours, if not 1,000 hours, into the game, and while I played through most of the Shadowkeep content on Steam, I kind of stopped playing the game overall since it changed platforms. In fact, in hindsight, I don't think this has anything to do with Steam directly, but rather more my changing perspective on the state of Destiny 2 in 2020. Before I get into my main points of discussion, let me just kick this off by saying that Destiny 2 was long established as a paid $60 game prior to it going free to play. And the standards of what's expected of a paid game versus what's expected of a free to play game may be significantly different based on your own point of view. I do not criticize this game because I feel Bungie owes anything to me personally, but rather, these are just some areas of the game I feel would benefit from some much needed developer attention. Alternatively, this feedback could also apply to any future third Destiny game, should Bungie decide to go in that direction instead. So if you're super triggered by criticism, or likewise triggered by me voicing some personal opinions and suggestions on how to go about fixing the game, here's your one and mostly only trigger warning. The first thing I'd have Bungie prioritize is completely reworking their entire open world design philosophy in regards to the current in-game planets. One of the things I really liked about Warframe, a game itself being very similar in design to Destiny 2, was how the Warframe team, a pretty small team by the way, after making most of the game's original lineup of planets, went back and one by one started repurposing those small simplistic maps into comparatively expansive and immersive worlds with a multitude of new locations, quests, and activities. One of the things that has always hurt Warframe, in a sense, is how generic and bland the story and lore elements are, something Destiny, on the other hand, has at least the potential to succeed at. Now, does the core campaign of Destiny 2 suck to an insanely stupid degree? Yep, it's awful. Not gonna deny it. And let's be honest, you shouldn't deny it either. But the various characters, factions, and races all have a certain distinguishing, unique characteristic that sets them apart as something more special than anything seen in Warframe. Destiny at least has the capacity to make a lasting impression on the player for more than a few moments at a time. Now, let's take our hypothetical proposal and take it one step further. Let's say Bungie was open to the idea of completely revisiting the whole planet design process, and that they were willing to expand the world size, let's say twice the size of the average Destiny 1 map, which in of itself is about 1.5 times the size of its revised and smaller Destiny 2 counterpart. So, a total increase all in all of about 4 times the existing average map size in Destiny 2. This wouldn't be too dramatic a departure from the existing formula, but it gives us the much needed room we need to make some necessary additions. The first and highest priority of these additions would be the creation of new enemy types. And no, I'm not talking about bosses, we'll get to talking about bosses later. No, I mean actual new enemy races. Except, instead of making these enemies universal and allow them to appear on any of the playable maps, I would simply add at least 1, maybe 2, exclusive enemy types per world, each with unique character models and attack animations. Speaking as someone with literally hundreds, if not 1,000, hours sunk into the game since launch, I'm getting pretty tired of just consistently running into the Cabal or the Vex. I just find it weird that with so many planets currently present in-game, there are literally only 4 enemy races, and in most instances you're really only going to be dealing with 2 of them the majority of the time. But let's say, for the sake of argument, you didn't want to completely invent a whole new bunch of lore for like half a dozen new races. That's a reasonable complaint. An alternative approach, which could be a little easier to integrate into the existing lore, would be to create new world-specific variants and subclasses for the existing enemy races. Given how many loadouts, subclasses, and specialties the player can take advantage of, it would canonically make sense and would make for more interesting gameplay if the enemy factions included more NPC units that had similar characteristics. I don't know if it was pressure from Activision or Bungie's own decision internally, though I personally am inclined to believe the blame falls more on Activision than Bungie, but there seemed to be a notable and definite shift in the gameplay formula between Destiny 1 and Destiny 2. Destiny 1 felt more or less like it was paving the way for an even bigger, more awe-inspiring universe in years to come. Now, a lot of people figured those expansions would come in the form of DLC, since Bungie promised a 10-year-long content roadmap for Destiny 1, which was a lie I didn't fall for back then, and honestly I'm surprised so many people did fall for it, but then we got Destiny 2. Oh well, it's not 10 years of expansion pack DLC as promised, because Activision and Bungie lied to your faces on that one, but hey, Destiny 2 is a major new entry into what was still becoming a pretty promising franchise. And what did Destiny 2 do? They mostly just repackaged all of Destiny 1's worlds, shrank them down a bit, and then added back in all 5 of their enemy races, and have so far added a total of 1 new single enemy race. Not exactly impressive statistics. I am personally disappointed because I believe Bungie as a studio has at their disposal some of the most dedicated and talented developers, environmental artists, character and creature modelers, and a truly fantastic animation team. I can hope this permanent separation from Activision will result in Bungie coming out with a third Destiny game within the next few years, one that can truly reflect their top quality capabilities. Another thing I'd love to see as part of the larger scale maps is more opportunities for exploration, and specifically more dungeons. Now, when I'm talking about dungeons, don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about instance dungeons, where you join up in a queue and the game takes you to a separate server or lobby, which will host said dungeon. I'm talking about actual permanent additions to the main worlds. I think to a certain extent, Destiny 2 has made strides towards embracing this concept, such as in regards to the Lost Forges, which is something of a hybrid between instance and non-instance. They physically exist within the world, but the forging process doesn't begin until you enter a separate lobby alongside the other players. I would also prefer Bungie start integrating all of their online website-based lore into the actual game. Destiny has a fairly interesting and reasonably vast amount of lore. However, at launch, very little of it was included in the base game. Destiny 2 wasn't all that much better at launch. Even now, the lore is, not great. Given the online nature of the world, it wouldn't make sense to force a lot of cutscenes or anything, but I'd love to get actual dialogue options with certain NPCs similar to other RPG franchises like Fallout or The Elder Scrolls. And also, possibly more realistically, I'd like to see more collectible lore notes or some kind of readable collectible system in-game, one that doesn't require you to open up a browser. For example, in the Star Wars universe, the Jedi would store all their knowledge on specifically designed holocrons, basically a futuristic external hard drive with a 3D projector attached to it. Imagine if Destiny 2 allowed you to discover similar objects scattered across the universe, hidden in obscure, difficult-to-reach locations. Because let's face it, if there's one thing Destiny 2 players can all agree on, is that parkour never gets old. Actually, not all, but I think most people could get behind that. Next on my list, I'd love to see more in the way of communication tools for groups, such as optional hotkeys enabling features like enemy target highlighting, so your teammates can help you focus fire on one specific target. Maybe enable a go-to marker, allowing you to set a custom point in your line of sight without having to tab out and do so via the map interface, because the current implementation is unnecessarily clunky. I would also like to see the weapon design philosophy of Destiny 2 to change utterly moving forward. Many guns in the game are identical or almost identical, with the only key difference being a slight power level difference, as well as maybe some variation in the weapon attributes. This combined with the game more or less pressuring you into melting down your guns and handing over the resources gathered from the melting to the gunsmith, one of the game's NPCs, in order to fill up an enormous progress bar, upon which completing said bar rewards you with a single new gun. Just feels like an enormous and unnecessary time-wasting grind. Now, I'm the type of player that will happily grind away if I feel there's something worth me investing that time, but there has to be a payoff at the end of it. I don't hate grind, I hate the feeling that I'm wasting my time while grinding. And I get that feeling in Destiny 2 quite a bit. Speaking of grind, since I'm on the topic, the bounty system sucks, especially during the late game grind. And when I'm talking about late game grind, I'm talking about from power level 950 to 1000. Although by the time this video comes out, the power level could have increased by now. So, who knows. Many bounties expire in one day, giving players little to no time to get them done. Also, in order to get maximum value from said bounties, you have to go around and basically visit every planet in the game to find each planet's one or two specific NPC bounty quest givers. To add insult to injury, many of these bounties require you to go back and forth between various planets before turning in said bounty. So you better get used to those animated loading screens when you travel between planets. My suggestion for this would be simple. Instead of having the NPC present the player with a dozen odd bounties, I would reduce the maximum amount of bounties to about 5 or 6, and also adjust the expiration length of most bounties. Also, when most bounties expire, they should be automatically removed from a player's inventory, which I don't believe is the case as of now, although I can be corrected there. Currently, it's impractical, if not outright impossible, to play through some of the more difficult PvE content without using an external communications tool like Discord. And while I more than happily recommend Discord to anyone who doesn't already have it and find themselves needing a good text and voice chat program, my personal stance has always been if you need to open up a second program or other window in order to make your game run optimally, then logically the game is lacking something on its own. So I think the first step Bungie has to do, at the very least, is allow more player callouts. Easier access to waypoint markers, enemy highlighting, it all helps, every little bit helps. Now again, some people may disagree with me about the grind problems, and that's fine. But one thing I think we as a community can all come together on is in regards to the weapon shader unlock system. I love the idea of customizing my weapon with different color options, but Bungie's current approach of having shaders be consumables, it defeats the whole purpose of customization, giving more control to the player over their appearance. A good customization system, by default, should provide the player with a variety of tools and step back and let the player decide what to do with them. That's not the case here. Personally, I'd rework it going forward to eliminate the whole consumable status. I'd still allow the player to collect them in-game and build out their cosmetic collection, but I'd also enable them to use the colors on any weapon or equipment piece. If the player wants to use the same bright pink or orange on every single item in their inventory and make themselves look like a glorified Power Ranger, I say let them. No more of this forced mix and match nonsense meta. I guess this, in a kind of indirect way, ties into my next point, and that's the lack of new classes and the somewhat disappointing amount of subclasses. Now, Bungie have added a couple of new subclasses via DLC, and that's fine, but the 1 or 2 additions aren't nearly enough to seriously stomp out this notable problem. Personally, as far as subclasses go, there should be a lot more effort to add new subclass skill trees. Instead of having only 4 by default, we should be looking at 6 or 8. Every new major DLC should be bringing with it at least 1 new class and at least 1 new subclass for all the ever existing classes. As much as I love getting a new planet and maybe a dozen hours of PvE campaign quests, I personally wouldn't mind dialing back the length of the average DLC campaign a bit to instead let the awesome developers over at Bungie get really creative about a new class and new subclass options. Fleshing out the class and subclass options is far more impactful than just adding a new map because while having a new virtual playground is cool, no one's denying that, having completely new character classes and subclasses would have long-reaching effects across all other areas of the game and would encourage people to approach the game from an entirely different playstyle and find renewed love for the game. Finally, on my list of suggestions, and this is less of a criticism and more just a quality of life thing, I'd love to see more in the way of social community spaces. The farm, for what it is a great hangout spot. It'd be fun to have 1 or 2 more areas where the player is completely free to just parkour, explore, engage in fun, casual minigames, and chat with each other without constantly running the risk of an enemy NPC shooting you in the ass from 500 meters away with a few weak shots from their laser rifle every couple of seconds. I think Bungie's decision to separate from Activision and instead port Destiny 2 over to Steam, accompanied by a new chunk of major DLC, was the right move. But I also think that beyond perhaps 1 or 2 more major DLC drops, we'll need to actually push on beyond Destiny 2 and instead focus their attention primarily on ensuring a future for the franchise. From both a gameplay and business perspective, Destiny 2 will definitely have staying power within the current free-to-play market on Steam. But with a new console generation emerging by early next year, I just don't see Bungie passing up the opportunity to take advantage of the increased technological capacity and the potential loss in player base as people move from the older existing gaming generation console to the newer. While they could just port Destiny 2 as is to the PS5 and new Xbox, and I'm sure they will, I would be very surprised if the Destiny 2 port wasn't soon followed up by the announcement of a new installment in the series, one made exclusively for the next-gen consoles and PC. Bungie may be many things, but just like all developers, they're in it for the money too. And with Destiny being a high-value IP for them, I just don't see them passing up an opportunity to push this series to an even better level now that they are their own publisher. On that note, that's where I'm going to call a halt to this airing of grievances. This is just my own opinions and feedback. Again, let me know what your stance is on Destiny 2. Do you play it? Do you not? If you do, what would you like to see changed or added? Before I go, thanks for the support recently. The channel recently crossed 100,000 lifetime views, which I'm still blown away by, and has also jumped up to over 575 subscribers, now looking at 580 as of the time of recording. Everything's looking really good. I look forward to hitting 600 subscribers soon. That's going to be nice. It feels nice to be appreciated, so even though I know this channel is still really small, but we're growing, slowly but steadily. If you want to support this channel, hit the subscribe button, but please also hit the bell icon to opt into getting notifications. I know it sounds cliche, but it actually does help. YouTube has been pretty bad this past year about notifying people about uploads. Clicking the bell right now is your best bet of staying informed. Thanks as always, this is WarriorDan signing out. Stay awesome everybody, and peace out.